Hey everyone, welcome back to Your Asian Besties. Today we are talking about the model minority myth and whether we should be political or not. And so I'd love to ask you both, what has been your journey with model minority? Or do you think that you sort of perpetuated that? Or do you feel like it was something that you needed to do to survive? I'm just curious, what your thoughts around that was and when it was that you realized that it was damaging to you.
Want to go first, Maryn?
Yeah, I didn't think I was a model minority, but then in hindsight, I think I was in some respects, and I do think it's sort of a coping mechanism, just focusing on the academics and feeling like you have to be perfect and you have to be obedient, and by doing that, that's the road to success, and it giving you a sense of superiority at times as well. And so, yeah, I think I probably did fit that mold when I was younger. And then it kind of took a process of unlearning. I think I started taking a few Asian American studies classes in college where they'd start talking about it. And then I started to understand a little more.
Yeah. What about you, Leah?
I would say it's similar. And sometimes I wonder, was it like a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because growing up, I feel like I definitely got it from my parents, right? Like you have to do good in school, don't get into trouble. After you graduate, you go to college and you get a great job, right? And it's just like the thing to do. And I didn't think otherwise. So I think part of me felt like, well, of course I'm going to do a good in school. What else? What other option is there? And I think it was as I grew older, probably not until, well, college is when I started not getting straight A's. And then after that,
Me too.
yeah, that's like, maybe. I'm not superior, just kidding. And then I think getting into the workforce, like my first few years of working, I remember distinctly operating under the assumption that as long as I do good work, I'm going to get recognized for it. And of course, they're going to promote me and I get paid more. And I didn't realize I had to ask for that or position myself, right, in ways where it's not just I just do the work. I actually have to speak up about the work I do or advocate for myself, right? I think the model minority myth, at least as it goes to that hardworking version, even as a kid, it was very much like teachers recognize you just for getting the good grades, right? And I think just that translation to that's not the real world was definitely a rude awakening. Overall, I think it helped in some ways in terms of I never felt othered. I think just everyone had the assumption she's a good student, and I think in some ways that made it feel like that was just part of my identity. I mean, me, not Asian me, but me. Get good grades. I did well in a spelling bee. I did, those accomplishments. Of course, I would be in the top of my class. And I just assumed the hardworking me was me. And now I wonder, right, how much of that pressure we internalize even now because we still have some lingering guilt or whatever that is if you're not doing that. So I don't know. All this to say, it's definitely shaped my identity. I've learned to let go of a lot of it. And I think it's a weird balance now with my kids. Of course, I want you to get straight A's. I want you to study. I want you to do good in school. And also, right, school's not your whole identity.
Mm.
Yeah. What about you, Ray? It's coming up.
So, as you guys are both talking, I want to say I was completely oblivious to the model minority myth.
I wish I was.
I was so oblivious to this. And I mean, so I think I felt it when I was a kid. I was so different, so weird, so different, so strange. And my language thing wasn't languaging. I was so clueless about how to really live in the world. And so I think that some people thought that I fell under that category of, oh, she's this quiet, achieving Korean or Asian American. But if you looked at what, my teachers being like, why are you so dumb? Why are you so slow? And even that messaging from my family and just like my friends, like, why are you so weird? Right? I knew that there was like this struggle. Like on the outside, I look very like I'm performing and I'm doing the right things, but on the inside and then on paper, none of it matches. So I think that's a lot of where I got a lot of my pressure from and a lot of my anxiety and my perfectionism. I'm pretty sure it came from not meeting both expectations. But then I think later, much, much later, I think when Maryn and I were doing Metastate movement, that's when I was like, something, it started to become a little more clear that there was this expectation for Asians to be quiet and do these things because they needed to in order to survive. And then it wasn't until like 2020 with like the really divisive politics that started to surface that I was like, oh my goodness, they were using Asians to pit against like the Black community to say, hey, look, there's this group of people that are making it. Why can't you? Right. And that's when I was like reading Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings that everything started to click. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. What is going on? And I think that's when I was like, okay, I wasn't political before because I was taught to be quiet and just be perfect and be like this little flower, which I was not meeting, by the way. But that's when I was like really angry. And I was like, no, this is really awful. You're using us to perpetuate this awful power dynamic that does not serve the majority of people. And so that's when I started to get really angry. And so I'm curious for you, like, I know that we all sort of had this like political realization that things are not the way that they seem and everything is cracking and we can argue that everything has been broken now. And I'm wondering how you guys think about your identity as somebody, or not just your identity, but what is your role in being part of the movement to change that? Maryn, I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned it on previous episodes, but even though I was I wasn't really aware that I was fulfilling that stereotype when I was young, but I always had this drive to transcend my race,
Mm,
right? To just be seen as an individual and to not be stereotyped. Because I think even when I was academically successful when I was young, if someone would call me a nerd, I would be like, no, I'm not a nerd. Like,
mm.
I'm cool too. I was always trying to transcend and in a way just so that I wasn't punished for being Asian, American. And now like we've talked about that word reclamation of trying to reclaim, my Asian identity and be an active part in the community now and not be afraid to speak up. But like Ray, I also went through that unlearning and the righteous anger, during the 2020. And I had to sort of move out of that finally to be a little more productive in terms of I don't want to waste all my energy in fighting the quote unquote enemy or racist people. I want to pour my energy into my community, and
Yeah,
things that lift me up because when you live in that state of anger and it's not sustainable,
right.
it harms you, you can only be in that for so long. So I feel like I'm finally in that place now where I'm part of a great community, especially of like Asian American creatives, and I feel really good about that. But it was definitely a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Leah, what about you?
I was going to say similar. I think 2020, George Floyd, and all of that was my wake up call. And like moving forward, I think most of where I expressed, actively trying to just speak up more and, yeah, also transcend the model minority myth was at work. So there were times like with the Asian hate crimes and all of that, just when the company I was working for didn't speak up, I checked in with some of my coworkers, like to get a sense of like how they felt with like the different things going on, escalated to HR, tried to get, like discussions going. Ultimately left when like the CEO of that company gave this very generic email like, yes, like things are rough right now. I was scared for my life with these hate crimes. It's like, dude, you're like a old white guy. Like, and it was just like, I don't want to like work for this company. So then it like, it was just like choosing what spaces I wanted to be in, like intentionally looking for what companies did align with my values more, I think was one thing. And then I think beyond that, just finding more spaces. The Asian American community here where I live now, participating in that, getting my kids to understand, right, like loosely about the things going on. And I think just every day, I mean, the things we're doing here now, right, with the podcast, just being present, being vocal, and constantly reminding ourselves and others that we are here and we all think differently. Just because we're all Asian Americans doesn't mean, we all act, think, behave in the same way. And, sometimes I'm the only, you know, Asian female in the room. And, maybe that's enough for me to speak up, right? And it's not that I'm always thinking about it that way, but it's like, okay, I just need to say it because I am just as much of an equal as everyone else in this room. And before I would feel that resistance, right? Like, is this like overthink? Is this the right thing to say? I might like offend someone. And I think
Yeah.
just getting older plus recognizing like my voice has value. Like I have just as much worth as everyone else. No one's probably overthinking this the way I do. Like or at least having to like play that in my head in order to speak up. I think I've started to do that a lot more in the last few years.
I think both of you guys are touching on, like Maryn talking about how, it was like the anger and the rage. And like Leah, you're kind of talking about like the fear and the discomfort. And I feel like all of that is part of the engineering, right? It's like they want us to be fearful, they want us to fawn. They want us to be quiet and just follow the schematic as it was designed. And I love what Maryn said is like, the antithesis to that is really finding like your community and finding connection and bringing joy in life and like back into the equation. And I love, Leah, how you're talking about like, you were looking for places to align your values with, right? I know like immediately after or like around the 2024 election, I was like, okay, goodbye Amazon. So we totally cut our ties with Amazon. And then it was like, well, I never really shopped at Target, but now I know never to go back in. Like it's just making these conscious decisions of seeing like, okay, well, who is perpetuating these really unjust power dynamics and how can we sort of take away out what we can, right? How can we put our control and our decisions back into people who do prioritize sort of like, a system that helps everybody sort of succeed and be free and liberated and to do their thing. And so I guess my next question to you guys is like, I guess I want to go back to what Maryn was talking about with like community, and you're talking about that too, Leah. Like, what do you think is important? Like, I know when we talk about like political engagement or like, actually, before I go into this question, I'll lead in with like a short anecdote. I remember I was sharing something on my social media about something. I can't exactly remember what I posted, but for me, it felt really political to talk about this. And somebody came up in my DM and was like, I never thought of that as political. And I was like, well, that's because you have always held a position of privilege that you didn't have to think about those things. And it made me realize like a lot of people still don't see their privilege. Rather than talking about privilege and who has it, who doesn't, like what is a more productive way to sort of create a system and a society that does feel more equitable? And so my question to you is, how are you using community and networking and, like pouring into your community, that how are you leveraging that to sort of offset the unfair systems and policies and rules that exist to sort of keep people oppressed? Maryn.
Maryn.
Yeah,
I
Maryn.
know.
Maryn.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast yet, but my husband and I, we were victims of a hate crime. Technically, they classified it as a hate incident. And, that was an example where I felt like I did use my privilege as being an Asian woman to really protect him in the situation because he was the one that was attacked first by a white male who was trying to weaponize his race against him and claim that my husband had a gun. He was trying to trespass on our property, yelling racial slurs at us. But I think it all goes to safety. And so I think having that awareness, like, we should be able to have those conversations about privilege without people taking it so personally because it's really systemic. So I think, but some people are just like, they're not going to hear it either way. But I think ideally we should be able to acknowledge, the privilege that's, and the way that this racial hierarchy that is used to oppress Black people the most. And that really, we have so much more in common. So, in reporting the hate crime, like I used my privilege because he didn't even feel safe to go into the police station to report, the crime. So I think that was an example. But the whole point is of safety, right? So I think having community, like for us having this podcast where, yes, Leah may be the only Asian woman in the room at work sometimes, but then she can come to us like and explain things and know we understand. So there really is power in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can align, and it's true, like not every member of our community has the same political beliefs, right? So it's
True.
really about finding individuals of all races that align with your values and being able to stick together in that. So that's definitely empowered me just to be able to speak up. And like in the case of that hate crime, there's so many hate crimes, there's so many microaggressions and hate incidences that don't go reported because
Yeah.
people are just afraid. They're afraid of losing their job, they're afraid of being gaslit, whatever it is. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
No,
that's,
the
yeah.
safety piece is so, so true. And Leah, I'm curious what you're doing, but I just wanted to share like like I have been in South Korea the past 7 years, and I finally have healed my nervous system so that in a way where I don't feel psychologically unsafe around people anymore. It was so hard because everybody I would classify as a threat. And in the States, it was I mean, I was so hyper vigilant everywhere I was walking, or even how I was planning my day, right? It was like, well, how do I keep myself safe? And even just like navigating, okay, well, which neighborhoods can I not be in at certain times? And so just living in South Korea and like feeling like, okay, well, guns are banned here, right? And it just feels so much safer. And so I finally feel safe enough. And so now I'm like really terrified of going back to the States and like, is my nervous system going to be completely dysregulated again? So yeah, that safety piece is really huge. Thanks, Maryn. But yeah, Leah, I'm curious, like, what are you doing within community that's helping you feel like you're being able to speak up?
So the Asian community I mentioned, they set up like mom walks, like AAPI mom walks every month. So I think it's just that, like normalizing that, like as a group, like we're out walking together. So I think it's both community and just kind of making our presence known. Um, Especially like where I live, it's kind of like a purple county. So I think that's part of it, right? Like there are, like politically, people I'm pretty sure like see me as an other or, don't think I belong here. I haven't explicitly encountered, like someone telling that to my face, but you can tell in these Facebook community posts, like there are people who are my neighbors, right? Or who live in the same town as me who, I definitely wouldn't feel safe around. I think the other piece is, I think what's interesting, what did make me feel safe to come here in the first place is that I am married to a white male. And I think just knowing that in itself is a privilege, like he'll speak up, right? If someone were to, like show any like disrespect towards me or things like that. So I think that's just made it easier for me, similar to feel safe in spaces where I might not feel otherwise. And then I think the final piece is just holding that door for others, right? So whether it's at work and making sure not so much race, but like gender equity is there, like I'm hiring and keeping a pipeline that's equally male and female, and I work for a company now that is pretty much female led, so which is awesome. And then same for my community, like where do I feel I belong, and then normalizing that for once again my kids, and being very cognizant, like where don't I feel safe, and trying to unpack like what would make me feel safer, or because it is a horrible feeling to feel like I don't feel safe there and I'm going to avoid that. And it's like, why do I need to work harder than other people to avoid a place that should be accessible to everyone? So I think it's that. I don't think I've fully figured it out, but I think it's that, just trying to put myself out there, even when I'm, like I am scared. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. It's really scary. But I I also think about time, right? Like how I'm spending my time. I think before I was sort of giving my time away to anything that was enjoyable to me, um, not being cognizant of who is working towards the system that I would like to see and who isn't, right? So I was sort of blind to that. And now I'm realizing like time is the thing that I have control over. And so, how do I support projects and people and systems and like places that are actually working towards rebuilding what I would like to see in the world, right? So, right now for me, it's like when people ask me to do things, I'm like, okay, first I need to identify, well, where in this blueprint of the world does your project stand? And does it sort of include people that have been not included before? Or does it continue to perpetuate things that make it harder for people who have been historically oppressed? And so I also wonder, like, how has your advocacy work and your visions, or I guess your work and your projects and your hobbies, how do you think that they align with the world that you want to see, or like the future that you want to see for your children?
Yeah, I just saw there's this activist, Grace Lee Boggs. I think I shared it on one of our stories for your Asian besties on Instagram. But she was just talking about the word like reimagination. Like everything, all the systems have to be reimagined. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's like a really nice word because we're always talking about burning it down, but we need a new blueprint. And so I know that within my, small business community where there's like a lot of women of color and they're doing their art, that we all really support each other and we are political and we're very transparent about our values. And because I think we have the community, like people are not afraid to share when something is unethical or they feel that they're being exploited, things like that. And so it's kind of like divesting from capitalism as much as you can. But it's also not ideal. Like, for example, we're about to have a baby, and I had to
Mm-hmm.
do my baby registry on Amazon because we have friends, in all different places. And to be honest, it's just the most convenient. It makes the most sense for us. Um, and so I did that. It's not 100%, you know what I mean? But when I buy art pieces and things like that, I'm going to my artist friends. I'm constantly supporting them in events and things like that. So I think it's good to set that precedent that it just has to be sustainable. It's not always sustainable to be, 100% human. And we also have to live in this world, but at least trying to foster it in whatever ways we can and pour back into our communities. Um, it may not be like the larger blueprint, but I know like within the communities that I'm part of, it feels like this little utopia when we get together and we're at events and everyone is so supportive. They're so sweet and we all lift each other up. And so to be able to experience that is a joy and, it can be a model, but we still have to all live our lives, right? We don't want to live miserable lives just being angry that the systems are so screwed up. So, yeah, that's what I would say. And I have pregnancy brain, so as I'm talking, I totally forgot what the question was, but hopefully I answered it.
No, I think you did. And it's so
Okay.
funny because you talk about pregnancy brain, and I'm like, my pregnancy brain was actually the clearest it had ever been in my life. And so I feel like I have the inverse where it's like I always have pregnancy brain, whereas where I was pregnant, it was
You
finally
didn't.
clear for the first time in my life. So it's kind of funny that you say that. But so yeah, it makes sense to me, Maryn. But what about you, Leah?
I think I imagine a world where we go down with like big corporations and everything's pretty much local again. Like
Mm,
I've seen a lot of trends. I mean, both you two and just a lot of my friends who used to work in corporate doing their own thing now. And
mm,
that's what I, aspire to do someday. And it's like supporting that, right? Supporting, a friend who's, like trying to, start her own freelance branding business or a coaching business or things like that. Even like with crafts and hobbies, I started getting into weaving a few months ago. And like I'll pay for higher quality yarn that's, like hand woven and hand dyed and stuff like that. I've invested in a few clothes that are like fully wool, that are being handmade in India or somewhere, and it's like it feels better than just always buying like the cheapest thing for the lowest price. I mean, to Maryn's point, we're all human. I still also do that too. But I think it is a balance of like being mindful of, okay, this is an investment I'm making in someone. And that's the world I want to see is like where we can all thrive creatively. Like I even just think about technology and AI. And I think
mm.
there's two sides of AI. It's one, how do we normalize it? So everyone knows how to use it, and it's not just like the privileged who utilize it because right now it's pretty accessible to everyone and it is going to change our world. Second of all, I also don't think AI can compete with human creativity. Therefore, like we should be like perpetuating and supporting everyone's creativity because that's what makes us human. And it's very demotivating when you can't make a living out of that, which is like my personal frustration, right? It's like, like I just want to like show the world like, this unique thing that makes me light up. Like, why is it so hard to do that? And why do we always have to work for other people to like make more money? Capitalism. Anyway, so that's my
No,
rant.
yeah, no. You know what you're saying, Leah? That kind of reminds me, like a lot of people, so in education spaces, there's like this huge controversy is like, oh, AI is just going to make everybody not think critically and it's really awful to education. And then there's like another side where it's like, no, it's opening up a lot of, it's, for example, people who used to not have tutors, who like didn't have people help write their essays, right? Now they have like a free tutor that they could access anytime. But then there's like that third where it's like, oh, it's really, really awful to our environment, right? Like using AI and all these data centers are using so much water and it's going to really increase climate change even like more exponentially. And so it's like there are so many arguments about AI. And so we should definitely talk about that
Oh,
in
that's gonna be a
another
whole new
episode.
episode. Yeah,
I know. I was like, wait, let's not go this route. It's very tempting for
sorry.
me,
It
but
is
no, no,
very
no, no,
tough.
no. It's so tempting. But I wanted to kind of come back to what you said, Leah, about uh, you know, this piece about using AI for like accessibility and like, but then also the creativity that comes with humans. And I could have probably said that better, but I'm curious for you, like, I think so much of resisting in a political way is by resting, right? And like doing art and being creative. And I think historically that has always been the case. And that's why they go after the artists first. That's why they go after like the writers and the artists. And because art is that sort of resistance, I think, to the existing blueprints of whatever it be, capitalism, colonialism, all of those things, patriarchy. And so yeah, I wonder, like, as we sort of wrap up this episode, talking about like that creativity element. And I also want to sort of ask because there's an author and DEI consultant and social activist named Michelle Kim. And she started a podcast recently called I Feel That Way Too. And she put out like this, or her team put out this post that said, hey, share your story like for 60 seconds talking about, one of these, an answer to one of these 6 questions. And so I was hoping we could sort of answer this question, this final one. It's, what is one hope you have for the world? And I love that question. If anything comes to you guys.
I mean, it's funny you say that because I only have a couple months left of my pregnancy. So I started reading this book called Wild Mothering. And, we've talked a lot about it in the past, but it's just going back to like love and, creativity, and us as women being able to be more free and more in touch with ourselves. And so that's something I'm thinking about in terms of becoming a mother, is to reclaim that part of myself. When we're living in this patriarchy, it's like we're forced to be doers, and we're forced to push down a lot of our intuition, a lot of our real emotions and feelings. From the time we're young girls, we have to kind of ignore our bodies and just carry on. The world doesn't really care about our experiences. And so, yeah, my hope is that, really like all people can just be free in their expression. And yeah, that's a big hope.
Yeah, it's a good hope though.
Mm-hmm. I echo that. I imagine a world where it isn't a privilege to be creative and make a living off of that. Like, why can't we just barter skills and services with each other, right? And we all have different strengths. So that's that's my hope of this new world after we burn everything down and create a new blueprint. What about you, Ray?
Well, I was going to say, I think, with my podcast, Homeroom, and I'm finally I'm going into season 4, and I'm finally in synthesis mode. So I'm seeing that, the education systems that exist, at least the ones that are based on the Prussian model, are that it was to make our children work for the economy. I think I'm realizing that actually to kind of reimagine, right, using the word that Maryn shared, what an education system can look like when it's not rooted in patriarchy, colonialism, capitalism, that it needs to be not competition based, but that it needs to be collaboration based. And so I think the one hope that I have for the world is to educate our children and to raise our children believing in themselves, believing in their gifts, believing that they have the ability to change the world as they are, not without having to learn all these things before they get out into the real world, but that they are already living in the real world, and to start making a difference right where they are.
Well said.
So thank you. And I just think like, this whole, the model minority myth and being political and being creative, like, I think it's all connected, right? We're no longer going to do the thing that is expected of us. We're going to do what we want. We're going to do what gives us life and meaning and joy, brings us in community with each other. And I just think, Maryn, like, we're all mothers now, and you are in your last trimester of pregnancy. And so how much more, meaningful it is to know that you already know what vision you have. And from day one, I mean, day one is already passed, but like, from first breath, day one, that your child is so lucky that you know how you're going to raise them. So yeah,
The
thank you guys
benefits of
for
being an old mom. But I
Geriatric
do,
mom.
yeah, I mean, I do think that that's like, yeah, breaking those cycles. I know I'm not going to put that pressure on my child to be perfect and obedient. Like, we just literally don't have time for that in the world, to be good girls or good boys. Like, we have to just come out the gate,
Yes, that's true.
guns blazing. So that's how I'm going to raise my son.
Yes.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our podcast and join us on socials at Your Asian Besties. Until next time, bye.